Hey guys, now it's time to put on our cast shadows on our snowboard pre-sketch. And the first thing we need to think about is where the light is coming from. And we usually try to think of a single light. Just like the sun coming down, when you look outside, there's only one light source from the shadows of your body on the sidewalk. So we're going to kind of emulate that same natural feel. And if I want the light to come in from this top angle from my left, that means all the shadows are going to be on the right side, kind of on the lower right side, because this always happens the opposite of the light source. So if your light source is upper left, your shadows will be lower right. So that's kind of a good way to think of it. Another way to think of this is kind of like a computer term, copy and paste. So if I'm going to make a shadow of this geometric shape land on that ribbon, that pathway behind it, I'm going to take this shape and kind of copy and paste it a little farther down and a little over to the right. So if I take this, I'm just going to go a little farther down, a little over to the right, and that's where it's going to go right there. So that little corner, I kind of copied and pasted. And again, in your pre-sketch, and it only lands on these shapes. These shadows that we're going to make will never go back into the space behind. You can think of that as negative space, background space, outer space, however you want to think of it. And these shadows also want to have a decent thickness to them. You don't want to make them really skinny or they're just going to look like an outline. Now we have to go across our drawing and see which shapes land behind other shapes, and that's where your shadows will go. So again, if my shadow's light source is coming this way, my shadow is going to be down here. And depending on the thickness of the shadow, if the shadow is a little bit thicker, it'll appear that there's a little extra space between these two. If it's a skinnier shadow, it'll look like those things are closer together. All right, here we go on the next one. So the light source is on top. The shadow will be on the bottom. Now I'm going to act like this organic shape back here is curved. So I'm going to, I call this an altered shadow, because the shadow bends with the curve of the shape. So even though this has, this kind of more of a straight line, I'm going to curve it down here to make it kind of look like the shadow is landing on a curved surface. And that happens in nature too. Watch your shadow as it climbs up steps. Set yourself up in front of a staircase and you'll see your shadow zigzag up the staircase. All right, here we go. So we are moving over here. We have this ribbon is pretty close to this. So just where the ribbon is, we're going to make this shadow kind of skinny, a little bit skinnier. But then we have kind of a triple layer here. So the shadow of this organic shape landing onto this one farther back, we can make that even thicker. So again, I'm thinking over and down and to the right, and I'm going to make this shadow get thicker. Here, that kind of represents that curve. And then I can skip it over. So I'm making this shadow thicker because this shape is farther back than this shape, and both of them are behind that front organic shape. So I'm going to try to make this one a little bit darker so they can separate from each other. Again, this is just shading, quick shading. Don't worry about the shading rules too much on this. Now this gets kind of tricky because now this, since light's coming from the top, this ribbon, that pathway, is going to cast a shadow onto this organic shape right behind there. So sometimes they're not obvious where they're going to go. So these two shadows will just blend right into each other. All right, we're almost done. So now we have one more shadow, the shadow of the ribbon that's landing on this kind of that lightning bolt shape. And this time there's a little curve here, so I'm going to just try to make sure that little curve happens. Actually, I see how I accidentally made that line look like it's a continuation of this line. And whoops, Usually I try not to let that happen. I'm going to let it be a little bit closer here and maybe let it get a little bit thicker here. So if that shadow is thicker here and skinnier here, it's going to make it look like this ribbon is kind of tilted and moving dynamically away from that lightning bolt-ish geometric shape. So we might be able to make a skinny little shadow right here, since light's coming from the left and this is to the right of that shape. Let's put one right there. Sometimes we can almost fake them in, but there is a reason for it. That shadow's there because the light source is on the opposite side of this shape. And I think that's about it. At this point, go ahead and check it out with your teacher, and we can get this traced on our final paper.